Good morning and welcome to Writers Fix Problems. My name is Blaine Pardoe, and I am a New York Times bestselling author and the author of the Blue Dawn and Land and Sea series. And today we're going to be talking with Mark James about his new book, Friendship Games. This is a political and military thriller. And as always, I'm going to kick off with a review of the book, which Mark hasn't heard yet. And then we're going to get in some discussion about this book because I had a lot of fun with this book. I've read his previous work, which is Alter Road, and we're going to talk a little bit about that and how that fits in. But we're going to jump in now with Friendship Games. Hi, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Guys, I'm not hearing anything.
Oh.
Well.
Huh.
Well, yeah. That'll be on his end. We'll give him a minute to fix it.
We'll give him a second.
Oh, there he goes.
Oh, there he is. Hi, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, as always, we're going to kick it off with a review of your book. You haven't heard this yet. This will get posted up on Amazon. So as Watcher always says, it's fun to watch the author squirm a little bit while I review your book. But you wouldn't be on the show if I thought your book sucked. I don't do that to people. That's for 60 Minutes to do. So political and military thrillers often start out with a bang, and so does Friendship Games, with the explosion of an American aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf. The Iranians are blamed for it, right or wrong, and their response is nothing short of spectacular, igniting a massive war throughout the Middle East. This is ground that other authors have tried to tread before, but there's a great vibe with Friendship Games, one that propels the reader through the story. The U.S. is caught off guard with this attack, and the overreaction on the part of Iran spills into numerous countries. Mark James has built a roller coaster and is more than willing to take readers on a wild ride to scare the hell out of them. So with that, I'd like to welcome you, Mark. That was my quick summary of Friendship Games. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about it, but welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
That was fun. Now, Alter Road was your first book. And Alter Road, for those of you who haven't read it, I recommend it. It's not required to enjoy this book, although this book is kind of a sequel. There's a couple callbacks to it. You really don't need it. I would almost recommend jumping with this book. It was so much more fun for me. I'm from Detroit where Alter Road was set. So for me, I knew the ground there well. And so it was familiar, but this was a lot of fun. Talk a little bit about this book. How would you summarize, without ruining all of the plot, how would you summarize Friendship Games?
Okay, briefly, there's an aircraft carrier that it's kind of like a USS Maine situation where an aircraft carrier blows up and sinks in the Persian Gulf, and because of the years of brinkmanship that Iran has played on the international stage, particularly in the Middle East, and the years of hostility between the United States and Iran, that the U.S. pretty much is, they suspect Iran, and so there becomes a push, kind of like a remember the Maine type of situation to stir up people for a war. There is a Iranian admiral who is a little paranoid, but just because you're paranoid doesn't mean no one's actually out to get you. So he writes a white paper, basically arguing a war strategy for Iran, and they take off with that. So it's basically a war of it's a preemptive strike by Iran because they think America is coming for them, and they aren't wrong.
No, they're not wrong, but their reaction, I'll call it their dramatic overreaction, is spectacular. It just goes off in different directions that it's interesting. We have discussed this on our sister show, the Privy Council. Iran has a very dominant strategy to export its brand of Islam across the Middle East. And that means conflicts with Saudi Arabia, conflicts with other nations as well. And you really hit on that and did it in a very good way. I have a friend who has done work with the royal Saudi family. And it really resonated with me because of the things he's told me intimately about the family that you nailed perfectly in terms of some of the political intrigue that is in that family as well. Clearly, you have refined your craft when it comes to this book. This was really a lot of fun. So what was it that inspired you to go down this path? Because I got to tell you, this is a romp through a war that devours the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, I guess current events. I mean, so I guess what kind of inspired this is there's this notion of forever wars that America's been involved in. I mean, we've been at war since, 2003, I guess, the invasion of Iraq. So we just, almost 20 some years. And of course, there was the Gulf War not long before that. There's the Kosovo War. There's the Bosnian War. There's the overthrow of Gaddafi. So there's all these different wars that America has been involved with over the decades. And there's kind of, I would say there's this expectation almost that, we're at war. You don't even know we're at war most of the time, but war is not something that should be taken so lightly. Things can go awry, even for a superpower. So I wanted to see if I could explore that.
You definitely did. I got to tell you, this was an incredible story, and you really built it around some key characters. I found myself actually sympathizing with one of the Iranian characters, the admiral you talked about, because it's like, wow, this, he has a good concept and understanding of what's going on here. I think my favorite character was the 18-year-old logistics specialist, sea apprentice, Thew Bryson.
Yeah, Thew Bryson, Matthew, but Thew, yeah.
You describe him as the lowest man on the totem pole. I wonder if you get, just to kind of salivate some of the readers and listeners here, talk a little bit about what his journey is, because he ends up in some really interesting situations.
Sure. So Thew, he wasn't designed to be the main character, but I was a supply guy in the Navy, so he was my into the story, if that makes sense, right?
Sure.
So and so when they get into battle, like he kind of goes along, the SEALs kind of take him under their wing. I'm not a SEAL. I have no idea about military strategy, and I have no idea. So I had to. So Thew was a way for me to explore battle through someone who has no idea what's going on, basically. So I didn't have to get into the attack sequences and the like. So his chaos to him. So that's what I want to capture.
I just loved it because the SEALs in this story, folks, grab this guy and kind of drag him along, mostly to just keep him alive.
Yeah.
And he ends up in several very key battles and confrontations. And you talk about a fish out of water, quite literally. This guy is way out of his element. And there's something about that that's highly appealing to me as a reader. When I read something like that, I was like, this is one of the more fun characters I've seen in a long time in a good political military thriller.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. I was worried about that.
No, well, it's just his perspectives are totally different. And, he's not out there doing heroic shit. Yeah. He's just trying to survive.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
And there's something very primal about that. I think as a reader, everybody can identify with, if I was in that situation, I would probably be doing exactly what he's doing. So look, this was interesting because Alter Road really was a domestic what would I call it? Not an insurrection, but definitely an out of control rioting situation in the U.S. That's your first book. This book, and at the end of that book, you even make this almost casual reference to, by the way, an aircraft carrier just blew up in the Persian Gulf. So you kind of planted what I would call a massive seed in this case. This book really picks up with the destruction of that aircraft carrier. And yeah, there's a couple of callbacks to Alter Road, but this is a whole different group of characters and a very different focus. So is this a continuing story? Is there more beyond these two books that are going to be out there for readers to get in the future?
Yes, that's my goal. So I have an overarching theme, and that again, one would be just how war it will eventually touch all of us if we continue down this path. So I want to explore that. I want to explore. So this, I don't want to give away too much, but things first off, all wars end badly, right? So even the Gulf War, that was 100-hour war, ended with an uprising among the Shia in Basra that Saddam Hussein just mowed down within eyesight of American soldiers. There was the Kurdish uprising that then led to the no-fly zones, and that was enforced for a decade. And so it just was not a very nice. It wasn't a splendid little war as the Spanish-American War was referred to as once, right? So I wanted to explore that, basically so a couple things, a lot of things that happen internationally, like refugee crises and interscene conflicts and things like that. I wanted to bring that home in Alter Road, that these things can happen here. It can happen anywhere. And so we really need to be empathetic to other places that are dealing with these situations. So that's what Alter Road was kind of about. And then the war in this book, I want to explore what happens domestically after something like this happens. So because I want to explore kind of themes of like legitimacy, government legitimacy, and what happens when that starts to break down. Alter Road kind of started in that direction. This one kind of detours, but it'll come back, I think, in the next. I haven't started yet. I'm working on an outline. I don't know where this is going to go. Yeah.
Well, and that's okay, because a lot of us as writers, I think everybody thinks you have this great master plan that's in a binder somewhere. And sometimes it's like, look, I know generally where I want to go with it, and I know what themes I want to address. But as a writer, it's like, look, I need to first figure out who the characters are and then let them tell me where this is going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Exactly where I am. Yeah.
And I got to tell you, I think you've really upped your game between these books. I don't know how long it took you to write Friendship Games, but there was a lot of very deep thinking in this. And like I said, we covered on the Privy Council, Iran's ultimate goals and objectives. And I almost got the feeling like you would almost watch that episode and said, so let's put this in narrative form, as a story, because it's really that on steroids. And
interesting.
I really was impressed with that, because the guys on the Privy Council are pretty smart guys, myself not included in that, but they're pretty smart guys. And you hit the nail on the head with this. I think this is really it's a very cautionary tale, because I don't think outside of fictional work or podcasts of those nature, I don't think a lot of people understand really the goals and objectives of Iran. I was wondering if you might be able to explore that a little bit, without going into the book, but talk about some of your research that you did into that and what you see as their ultimate goal, because this was eye-opening.
Yeah. So most people, I don't know if know this about Iran. Iran is the center of Shia Islam. So there's a split in Islam, the Islamic world, between Sunni and Shia. Majority of the world is Sunni, and then Iran and some areas around Iran, like Eastern Saudi Arabia, which I talk about in the book. Eastern Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, these are also Shia countries, which is right there, same neighborhood as Iran. And then parts of Lebanon, parts of Syria are also Shia. So they're spread around a little bit as well. But Iran is the kind of cultural center, the cultural heart of Shia Islam. And Sunni and Shia do not necessarily get along, right? So Iran also went through a revolution in 1979 called the Islamic Revolution. And of course, those of you who are my age or older certainly remember the hostage crisis that dragged on for 444 days. And so that was not long after the Vietnam War. So the United States really was in no position to go to war against Iran after they seized their hostages. There was a rescue attempt that was not successful. So, and then of course that would lead later to the creation of SEAL Team 6. And anyway, which is now famous, right? For the Osama bin Laden raid. But Iran, there was a revolutionary zeal that happened in Iran after the overthrow of their government, the installment of the Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979, 1980. And they want to export that revolution throughout the Middle East, basically. And they want to ultimately, there is a world system that we have, right? That was after World War II, was kind of set up by the United States and the Soviet Union, the First World, Second World, and then we kind of fought proxy wars between, our two systems throughout the rest of the Third World. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, is kind of left with the United States, but Iran wants to break free of this kind of global system that they just want to disrupt it. They don't want to be part of it. And so they push back at every opportunity they can to break the system and create something anew, at least at their part of the world, and beyond.
Yeah, well, and the countries that you got involved in this conflict in friendship games, I was amazed at the depth of them, because we're back into Kuwait, we're in Bahrain, we're into Saudi Arabia, we're into Iraq. I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about the title of this book and how that fits into the storyline, because that was, when I saw the title, I was like, this is a strange title for a military political thriller. And it wasn't until I got in the middle of the book that I realized, okay, I now know what this is about. And it was kind of one of those aha moments, like,
okay.
I was wondering if you'd talk a little bit about that.
So I had a working title called Red Glare, which is, a pretty good, I guess, thriller title. But yeah, I was nearing completion of the book. I'm like, nah, it's got to go. This is obviously friendship games. It just kind of came out, as I wrote. So those countries that you mentioned, Iraq, Kuwait, or I should say southern Iraq, Kuwait, eastern Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain. That's your Shia area, right? So Iran, and then those parts are also Shia, and they're not. Iraq today is kind of a fiction as a country. It's actually three separate entities. There's the Kurds in the north, there's the Sunnis in Baghdad and north and west, and then south of Baghdad to Basra are the Shias. And the United States kind of basically, we recognize an Iraqi government, but there's power sharing, and they're de facto three separate entities for the most part, right? So in this book, the governor of the Basra governorate, or the southern state of Basra in Iraq, again, is more or less independent, and is kind of gets roped in by Iran to invite Iranian athletes, and I'll put quotes there, right, into Basra to have a international friendship games. There's a new bridge that's actually built between the two countries in the south of Basra, a big, very nice bridge, the International Friendship Bridge, the Ayatollah Al-Sistani International Friendship Bridge. He was a cleric in Iranian-born Iraqi cleric in Basra. In fact, his forces were the ones that we turned Saddam Hussein over to after the U.S. invasion in 2003 and the capture of Saddam Hussein, and they would subsequently hang Saddam Hussein. Anyway, so they officially invite the athletes in, but of course they're not athletes. This is actually a kind of like a little green man situation. These are Iranian soldiers and special forces that basically move into Iraq because they basically, their mission is to deny the space for which the United States can launch a war against Iran. There was a buildup that after the first Gulf War, any buildup now would be much shorter because we have pre-positioned materials in places like Kuwait. And so these soldiers were sent into Basra, and from there they basically blitzkrieg south into Kuwait to take out any, basically to seize the spaces that America would be utilizing to start a war with Iran. And of course, they have some tricks up their sleeve, which I'll let you, if you want to, if you want to talk about that before I do. But they continue. They basically, and I should also say this is an area that these are city states for the most part. This is not a densely populated part of the world. So they basically moved from they moved into Kuwait City, which is basically Kuwait. From there, they moved to Daman, which is eastern Saudi Arabia, and they're at the doorstep of Bahrain. Again, it's the Manama is the major city of Bahrain. It again, a city state. Qatar, same thing. Doha is pretty much the whole country of Qatar, except there's deserts around them. And then you move into the UAE, and you've got several Emirates that are mostly cities as well. So that was the strategy by on the part of Iran.
Well, I got to tell you, it was interesting too, because there was one military base, and I forget the name of it, but it was this one where you talk about the lines of American equipment.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry, that would be in Kuwait. Yeah.
Yeah, and I Googled it, and sure enough, there's photographs of the lines of equipment exactly as you described it, and I was like, God, that's a little creepy that we have it out there so blatantly exposed, but ready to go.
Yeah.
Like as you said, we've pre-positioned ourselves for wars, which is a little creepy all on its own. And you talk about that a little bit in the book too, that, there's a feeling if you're the locals down there, that's like the United States isn't here now, but they're more than willing to come back.
Yeah.
And, it's good. I loved to, and I won't put this in the review. I love it when an author hides a few Easter eggs. And I'm not going to reveal all of them, but my favorite one was General Jack Ripper Sterling. And for anybody who doesn't get that joke, go watch Dr. Strangelove. When I read that, I did exactly what you just did. I doubled over laughing. Because it was like, okay, this is so funny. I love it when authors do that. And
I was wondering if my editor would catch that, or if he would Mark, this is good. That's not going to work.
Yeah, well, it worked. It was good. I really enjoyed it. So this is a book too that you think you know who the villain is, but you're not. This is never qualified in the book, and it's. All fingers point to Iran as having attacked this aircraft carrier. And even within the Iranian ranks, there's belief that they did it. But you never spell that out. So I'm a little curious, is there more to that story that we're going to get, or is it not necessary? Because it's like you said, with the blowing up of the Maine, there's still people that argue that it was a mine versus a coal explosion and things along those lines. And they argue about it adamantly. So I'm kind of curious, is that something we'll see resolved down the road?
I don't think so. No, I wanted to leave that open, like the Maine. The Maine, we were very, the American government was very, very much adamant that Spain was responsible for the Maine. And if they weren't, it served its purpose. So in this case, and also the when the Maine sank, it sank in Havana Harbor. They didn't have the technology at the time to really go, to investigate undersea, kind of a forensics of what happened here until decades later. And I think it was just a few years ago, maybe a decade ago or so, a dive team went down there and they basically concluded that it was the boiler basically blew up, which they were wont to do in those days, right? So, so I want to keep that open. I know that aircraft carriers are so was it sabotage? So I leave that open. Was there, somebody on board? Was it a mine? So, but it's sunk, and it's it's going to be very difficult. It broke up, so it'll be very difficult to. They could do an investigation, but now that the situation has changed, we're not in a position now to actually send a team in to investigate.
Yeah, well, you come right out and say it. It would take years to do the investigation. On top of that, when the ship goes down, the fires are so intense in the inside of the vessel that when it hits the seawater, or the seawater hits the heat, it goes off with the force of a 20 megaton bomb.
Yeah.
So it's not a small, to piece it together would be impossible. And so that was when I realized once that explosion happened, it's almost secondary to all of this, that it's like, okay, they'll never know what happened at this point.
Right.
It's impossible.
Yeah. So it opens the door to conspiracies, and I mean, everyone's got their own theory, and America. So the next book, I imagine, what part of the themes I'm going to explore is, even though we may or may not be responsible, or I'm sorry, well, no, I'm giving away something else. Never mind. So,
well, I got to wonder too, with the way you've approached this, have you had any contact with federal authorities or the military at this point going, this is an interesting thing. Can you come in and do a presentation on this book?
No, not yet.
I really enjoyed this. You guys, for those of you who've read like Mongol Moon and stuff, this is very much a Middle Eastern political thriller, but honestly, it was right up there with Tom Clancy. So I mean, it was great stuff to read. So what else are you working on besides books in this series?
This is it. I have a full-time job, so I can't really. I wish I could write full-time, but I write when I can. So I'm have an outline I'm working on now for the third book. So it is kind of a series that I'm working towards something big at the end. And so this is the next step. So I think either one or two more books, and that'll finish that I'll have concluded that rabbit hole. I've explored that rabbit hole, basically.
Well, for people who aren't familiar with you, Mark, tell us a little bit about what you do during your day job. Where do you live? We see the Maryland flag up behind you, so I got a pretty good idea.
Yeah, so I live in Maryland, right? Surprise, surprise. So I am a academic. I'm a geographer. So I study economic geography, basically the geography of jobs, where jobs are, why they're there, how that changes through time. And a part of that is politics as well. So I explore basically how cities basically try to revitalize, right? Because of, I don't get too academic, but capital is moving all over all the time, and cities need to be ways to try and capture that capital come into the city, and so they're in competition with each other, and so it's a dog-eat-dog world as well. So that's the research I've done up to this point. So that's one. But before I got into academics. So my stepdad actually was a car mechanic, and my mom was a secretary for Ford Motor Credit Company. So we moved around a lot when I was a kid. So my stepdad was a very good mechanic, but I don't think he was a very good businessman. So when the garage was doing great. When it wasn't, we had to sell everything and move basically and try something else. So I moved around a lot. I actually went to 11 different schools in that K through 12 period. Wow. Five different high schools in that 4-year period. So then I joined the Navy. When I graduated high school, I joined the Navy. So I was an aviation storekeeper. Today, it's a logistics specialist. I was stationed in P3 Squadron in Hawaii. We deployed to Japan. We deployed to the Philippines. We deployed to Adak, Alaska, in way up north in the Aleutian Islands, in the middle of winter. And then I did that for the GI Bill for mostly, but so I did that. So I did that, got out, went to college, and I'm still here. So
that's great, though. It's an interesting background, especially you don't hear of anybody in the geography business, so to speak. I think you're the only person I've ever talked to that does that for a living, and it's fascinating stuff.
Thank you. So yeah, I like geography. It's just funny because I took a class in my senior year called political geography. You could take here in Maryland. You could take like an elective your last semester. So I took that class. Loved that class. It was basically international relations and the like. But I assumed it was political science. And so when I eventually went to college, I majored in political science, and I was pretty passionate about political science. But they kind of killed that passion, right? So it was all about PACs and raising money and campaign. It wasn't really my cup of tea. So then I took a geography class, geography and international relations. It was just like the course I had in high school, And so I started to load up on geography classes at that point, and I loved every single one of them, from land use planning to meteorology to, I mean, it was just great stuff. It was too late to major,
it definitely
but I did the
comes
minor.
through. You've got the geographic sense when you look at your background. Definitely comes through in your descriptions of where these guys are and what they're seeing.
I try to, I hope I don't go overboard. I do try to educate in the book. I think that's kind of my responsibility as well, to talk about geography and, explore these places basically, and give these places a life, right? You know what I mean? That it's not just some generic place. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, folks, if you haven't judged yet, my recommendation is pick up Friendship Games. A lot of fun to read. I got hooked on it. I usually am doing 3 or 4 books at a time that I'm reading, and I kind of shelved everything to do this book because as I got into it, I got more and more hooked. So I shuffled stuff aside so I could get into this. That's how good it was. Where can folks contact you, Mark? Where can they get in touch with you, and where can they buy your book?
So my book is available at Amazon in paperback, Kindle, also audiobook or audible version. It's available at Barnes & Noble. So pretty much anywhere you could buy a book, it's available. You can contact me. I'm on Twitter. So Mark James Author. Yes, Mark James, twitter.com/Mark James Author. It might be Author Mark James, actually. So one of those. I have a website, markjamesauthor.com, with all my contact information as well. I'm on Instagram, also Mark James Author, and I'm on Facebook, Mark James Author. And Twitter is Mark James Author. I'm looking at it now.
All right. Hey, Watcher, do we have anybody online that's posed a question for us?
No, just a lot of people saying hello.
Good.
Hello, everybody.
Well, Mark, I really appreciate you coming on today. It was a lot of fun. This was a fun book to read, and like I said, it was so close to the Privy Council stuff. I'm going to recommend to Stan that he reach out to you and get you on, because you really, when somebody gets it that accurate, I always appreciate it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So many people don't do the research, and it's clear you have done that with this book. Friendship Games is a lot of fun. And for those who are going, well, do I need to read Alter Road to get into this? My answer is no. Just pick up Friendship Games, then go back and read Alter Road, and you're going to understand a lot more of the background behind it.
Yeah. I have to say, this was also a lot of fun to write. Once I got into it, I cracked myself up a few times, like the General Sterling. That was one. A couple, like you said, Easter eggs that are in there. I had fun writing this one, and I did. This one actually was faster. Alter Road was, it's my first book, and so I spent a lot of time with it, and it took me a couple years to get through that one. And then probably another year, 6 months of editing, I guess. I should have taken more time. This one was just, I let it flow, if that makes sense. I'm like, all right, just let it go. And I had a good time writing this.
Well, how do you like work? You and I both have the same publisher for one of our series. My Blue Dawn series and your series are both done by Defiance Press. How do you like working with Defiance Press?
I do. I like the, I mean, basically they're advocates of freedom of speech, and so I do like them. The only caveat I have is that they are a hybrid, so they don't really. There's no they have a very narrow distribution, but the books are available on and anywhere you buy a book, you can find them. So I like Defiance Press very much so.
Yeah, I do too. They've been very supportive of the stuff I've been writing. But I come at this very differently. I had 80 some books under my belt before I started writing with them. You're new, and this is where you started. So I was curious what your perspective was as a new author.
Yeah. So I've got to say I have nothing bad to say about Defiance Press. I mean, they've like you said, they're very supportive, and so absolutely.
Great. Well, Watcher, any questions from you?
No, I think that's about it.
All right. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being on. Folks, it's very important before we sign off. If you like the show, click the like button, give us a thumbs up. Obviously, we encourage you to subscribe because we come on every week. Next week, we're going to be talking about a really interesting book on the Second Amendment, which is always a fun subject. So, we won't have the author on, but we're going to talk about what the author's written about. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to cover. So thank you all for joining. And with that, we'll sign off for this week.
Thank you.